Welcome everybody to 52 Living Ideas. Tonight we'll be continuing our journey through the Analects. We are on book 11, and I believe it's chapter 23 that we'll be starting with, or 22. Okay. With that, we'll have one or two readings, and then we'll go to Jason's translation, and then we will go to open it up for comments from there. So, is there anybody that would like to volunteer to read their version of book 11, chapter 22? Aman, or were you gonna?
I can. I was just looking for someone else, but I'm happy to.
Oh, okay.
Book 11, verse 22. Zulu asked whether he should immediately carry into practice what he heard. The master said, "There are your father and elder brothers to be consulted. Why should you act on that principle of immediately carrying into practice what you have heard?" Zanyo asked the same, whether he should immediately carry into practice what he heard. And the master answered, "Immediately carry into practice what you hear." Kong Hua said, "Yo asked whether he should carry immediately into practice what he heard, and you said, 'There are your father and elder brothers to be consulted.' Chiu asked whether he should immediately carry into practice what he heard, and you said, 'Carry it immediately into practice.' I, Chiu, am perplexed and venture to ask you for an explanation." The master said, "Chiu is retiring and slow, therefore I urged him forward. Yu has more than his own share of energy, therefore I kept him back."
Okay, so let me start. Right. Unless anybody want to read his or her own translation. Otherwise, I will start. Okay, chapter 22nd. All right. Zilu asked, "May one put what he learned in practice right away?" The master said, "When one senior," okay, so the actual words Confucius used is the father and the older brothers. Okay, so that means seniors. When one senior are alive, how can one put what he learned in practice right away? Lunyu asked, "May one put what he learned in practice right away?" The master said, "One may put what he learned in practice right away." So then, Gong Xihua, another disciple, asked the master, when you, that means Zilu, okay, when Zilu asked, "May one put what he learned in practice right away?" Master said, "Your senior are alive." When Qiu, who is Ranyu, asked, "May one put what he learned in practice right away?" Master said, "One may put what he learned in practice right away." He called himself Chi, okay. "I'm confused. May I ask why?" The master said, Ranyu, which is Qiu, okay, has the tendency of holding back. So I need to push him forward. That's why he answered, one may put what he learned in practice right away. And you, which is Zilu, Zilu has a tendency of competing because he has the competitive personality. So I need to hold him back. That's why he tell Master Confucius told Zilu, okay, your senior, your father and older brother still alive. How can you put what you learned in practice right away? So you need to wait until your seniors doing something or say something. Don't just act right away, because Zilu kind of like rush. Okay, so Confucius want him to slow down, think a little bit, wait for other advices. But Lunyu is a person have tendency of holding back. So Confucius will tell him, do it. When you know something right, just do it. So I think that's with this chapter reflect what Confucius' attitude to his disciples. That's it, Aman.
Thank you. I think this chapter is fairly self-explanatory in the sense that you can see the master's lessons don't always conform to a single solitary lesson that one size fits everyone. But what I think is interesting is he's catering lessons predicated on character, and he is a astute enough judgment of these people's character to determine what the proper lesson is that will best benefit each of his students. That is something that is an incredible skill. And any instructor, any teacher will tell you to cater your lessons to that sort of specificity is a real challenge. It would be something that would only come from days, years of exposure to one person over a long time, so that you have a real gauge of who they are and what their strengths and weaknesses are. In modern education, we may get a thumbnail version of that, you know, in a quarter, in a semester, in an academic year. So there's something to be said for what Confucius is investing in his students, and what he's investing is a real genuine attention to them. That I don't know that that lesson necessarily was explicit in the passage for every reader over the centuries every time they've read it, but I think it is probably the most consequential lesson of that passage.
Thank you, Aman. So now we will open it up for comments and questions. If anybody has any wishes to share their thoughts on either of these, or this passage, I should say, feel free to raise your hand or type exclamation point in the chat. Yeah, nobody will is not very, everybody's not okay there. Allison, go ahead.
Yeah, I thought it was interesting because I really have noticed this, that sometimes there are people who they just have to be nudged because they're just not going to do anything unless you sort of push them along, you know, and so that's the approach that you need for those kinds of people. And then I've noticed also competitive people who are just naturally competitive, they sometimes are so determined to compete and, you know, be better than people that sometimes they don't adequately prepare for things, and they just have a tendency to just like jump into things that they're not prepared for, because they're not, you know, and so those people, you've got to kind of rein them back in a little bit, you know. And you know, it is really true what you were saying, Aman, about when you're teaching, like if you've known someone for many years, you know all their personality quirks, but even just in the course of 1 year, you can kind of figure it out. And you do, you know, I definitely do different approaches for different kids, because you can't always use the same approach on every person. It's not going to work. So yeah.
I'd like
Thank
to
you,
respond
Allison.
to that just briefly,
Please.
if I can.
Please do.
I absolutely agree. I think what he's setting up with Ranyo and Zulu are archetypes, and that it's easy to recognize those archetypes when they fit that perfect mold. It's when the characteristics blur. You have somebody who is competitive with hyper energy, but they never follow through. They actually do need pushing in continuation. Or you have somebody who seems very lackadaisical or very, you know, sort of reserved, or cautious even, or overly cautious, and they do, tend to need some prompting. But when they get, ahead of steam, they're like a bulldozer. They just keep going and going and going. And so I think they're offered as archetypes, but I think the idea is really read, we'll use Chinese terms, really read the duh of the person that you are engaged with, so that you are making adequate assessments for their needs. And those needs can change over time. Hopefully, if they're learning lessons, they should change over time.
One thing I'd like to share is in the chapter 18, right? There's some comment on some basics is negative comment. Let me share the screen. Okay, on 18, if we look at 18, we read the last week, talking about chai is damp. Okay, we will talk about chai later. Okay, zheng shen is dual, and the shi is spacious. Okay, basically talk about he's one-sided or not sincere enough. Yu, which is zilu, is coarse. Okay, basically talking about he is not prudent. Okay, not think enough. That's why Confucius give him, ask him to wait. And his excuse is, you have somebody senior to you, let them go first. Listen to them before you take action. So that's it. And any other comment?
I could share actually maybe a couple of thoughts really briefly. Interestingly enough, actually, I just came from a discussion where they were talking about the objective and the subjective, and and one of the things was the idea of understanding the objective to clear up misunderstandings with others. And I was thinking about it just now, and one of my comments would have been, not only is it to clear up understandings of others, but understanding ourselves. So what I'm saying is that here is Confucius, I see, is giving feedback to his students so that they actually understand themselves, which is actually critical when you're talking about character formation, because you actually have to know yourself in order to know how to act in the world. So by telling Zulu about his hyperenergy and correcting him, and Lunyu about being pushed into action, that he's teaching his students that about who they are, and that also has another important it's another important function, and that is because then once you know who you are, you can actually play your role in society as best as you possibly can, because you know your strengths and you know your weaknesses. So a lot that's also comes into the idea of role ethics as well. Again, once you understand yourself, you understand your role in a greater community. So in a way, I'll even go so far as to say that's a lot of the ideas between about Stoic cosmopolitanism, in a way that maybe Confucius wasn't seeing himself as a citizen of the world, but he definitely was seeing himself as a citizen. So and helping people find their way. So I think that this is an important passage, because I think that it starts to get to the heart of some of the main things that tools that Confucius is trying to give us, and one of them is feedback from other people to have more of an objective understanding of ourselves.
I agree with you, Joe. This is one of the more important passages. Before we officially started tonight, we had a brief conversation about the sort of traditional Chinese education where a student would memorize the Analects. And Quan was sharing that you might memorize certain key passages. And Jason had actually said some of the same thing, that there are certain parts where you fixate on, you zero in on because they sort of illuminate a broader lesson. This is one of those passages. This is one of the passages I think just about every Chinese school kid will have had exposure to at one point or another. And yeah, the depth to it has many levels. The other thing that this does, I find this passage should also be a disclaimer for the rest of the Analects, because if you've read conflicting things so far, it's because you've read lessons for different people. But the overriding theme remains the same. You are here to serve others. That is one of Confucius's overriding missions for him, for his students. And so who you're serving, when you're serving them, how you're serving them, those details may vary. Zulu, you should pay more attention at service to being in service to your family. Ranyo, you've got to go and take all this knowledge you've learned and use it somewhere for someone. And it reminded me that there's an earlier passage, I don't even remember all the context, but it was something about would think about something 3 times before acting. And the master thought and said, twice enough. So we have Ranyo, do it now. Zulu, think about it a lot more. And the average 2 times of thinking is probably good for most people. Or in that specific case, that person at least should stop overthinking.
Thank you for that, Amon. And I think it, as you said, the principle of serving others is really the most important thing to take away when we're thinking about Confucius, because whatever their students may be doing and whatever he is critiquing them, it is with that in mind. So it's with that principle in mind. So thank you. If, as long as is there anybody else that has a comment? If not, we'll go to number 23.
I think we can go 22, 23, 24 together since they are short.
23, 24, and 25, you're saying?
25, let's wait, because.
Okay, 23 and 24 then. Dare I ask you again, or I can.
Among, you want to read it?
I can read it.
Oh, you want to read? That'd be great. Yeah.
Yeah, I think people get tired of hearing me.
Sure. The master was put in fear of Kuang, and Yang Wang fell behind. The master, on his rejoining him, said, "I thought you had died." You replied, "Well, you were alive. How should I presume to die?" 24. Ji Zi Ran asked whether Zi Zhong and Rang Kui could be called great ministers. The master said, "I thought you would ask about some extraordinary individuals, and you only ask about you and Kui. I don't know if I'm saying that name correctly, but please correct me when I'm done. What is called a great minister is one who serves his prince according to what is right. And when he finds he cannot do so, retires. Now, as to you and Kui, they may be called ordinary ministers. Ziran, then they will always follow their chief, will they? The master said, in an act of parricide or regenocide, they would not follow him.
Thank you, Joe. I think that's hard for you.
Yeah, that was
I think when we were students, like 15, 13, and then being asked to read or memorize, just read it, probably just as hard as you are reading now. So, because it's not like today.
It's always good to push ourselves, if not for learning, for humility.
So I think it's 23 and 24. The reason I put it together is they deal with three major students, right? Yan Yuan is kind of, if you remember, Yan Yuan is his Confucius model student. Okay, so it's always the best. Zhong Yu, which is Zilu, we mentioned before, right? The person always next to Confucius. Lunyu, okay, is the person, if you remember, is he working in the financial guy, and Confucius say he worked for the Ji family and help them to collect money, and everybody can criticize him, beat the drum and criticize him. So at least these three disciples are all very capable person. Okay, totally different personality. For some reason, Yan Yuan never get a job. Okay, we don't know why, but he never get a job. So, okay, the comment is very different. So, but he also followed Confucius. So, chapter 23, the master was in danger in the state of Kwang. Okay, so I think we may, if you want to check, it's on the book 9, chapter 5. Okay, Confucius was in danger in the state of Kwang. Okay, because he was almost being killed. People thought he is somebody else called Yang Hu, and they want to kill. I think they want to kill Confucius, and Confucius escaped. And then, so this one is described that situation. So the master was in danger in the state of Huang. Yan Yuan fell behind. So the master said, I thought you had died. The Yan Yuan said, when you are alive, how could I dare to die? I think this one reflects a very important message, especially in the Chinese tradition. So basics, your senior still alive, you should treasure your life. Okay, so commit suicide, damage your body, okay, that's considered very bad, because you are not only live for yourself, okay, you have the duty to serve your parent, you have the duty to serve your senior. So Yan Yuan's answer is very, I would say, set up a tradition for Chinese, basically talking about when you are alive, how will I dare to die? Right? So I think that's very important. When your parents alive, okay, when your parent alive, you should treasure, especially your life. 24. Ji Ziran. We don't know who is Ji Ziran, but basically Ji Ziran is in the Ji family, which Confucius always have a problem, because Ji family is in power, control the power of the state of Lu. And then since they control the power, okay, control the government, so Confucius have to respect them. And that's why they also respect Confucius, but Confucius always want to keep some distance with the Ji family. So when they ask question, Confucius always give the answer, but always give the hint, okay, try to criticize him in a subtle way. So we can pay attention on this. When Ji Ziran ask, can Zhong Yu, and which is Zilu, okay, and Ran Qiu serve as great minister, okay, and the master said, I thought you will ask something unusual, or I thought you will ask somebody else, right? And you only ask about you, which is zhong yu, and qiu, which is zhan qiu. Okay. Remember, I keep the translation. The name is very confusing. Ji Ziran call these two persons zhong yu and ran qiu. Okay, they call them as a formal name. But when Confucius mentioned these two persons, he always mentioned as Yu and Qiu, because this one are junior, are his disciple. So Confucius called his given name. Okay. So Confucius said, a great minister serve his Lord in accordance with the Tao. Okay. Confucius used the Tao here, basically means the proper way. I think Confucius means according to the rituals. He retired. I mean, he meant as a great minister. He retired when he cannot do so. So Confucius said an important message, right? As a great minister, I serve my Lord, but I also follow the ritual, follow the Tao. That's Confucius said. Okay, so Ji Ziran then asked, does this mean they will follow the orders because you work for him, right? Will you follow my order? Here's Confucius' answer. Okay, the master's answer. They will follow the orders to kill their fathers or lord. Okay, so that means serving as a great minister to Ji family, they will follow the rituals, follow the law. Okay, they will follow their boss or their employer, but to some point they will not follow. They will retire. For example, kill the father or kill the lord, because Confucius say that because Ji family, I don't know how many years ago, but when they in power, that's how they get into power, because they kill the Duke of Lu, okay, and then set a new lord so they can control the government. So Confucius kind of tell them, okay, they did something bad, okay, and then my student will not follow your instruction if you want to do this again or you want to do something bad. So that's the message here. So I will stop here and I give to Aman.
Thank you, Jason. And I was just typing up something in the chat that I'm going to drop real quick, because depending on who's reading what version, Joe, you asked for correction. It's hard to correct you because what I just dropped in the chat are the two Anglicized versions of names for Jisuran, Rangyu, and Zhongyu. And you can see just at a glance in the chat, the Wade-Giles system, which is one system of doing it, has a very different way of taking those sounds and translating them into the English alphabet. Pinyin is the other way that Chinese is anglicized. And what you see in the second half behind the equal sign is the Pinyin version of those same names. So if you're struggling or tumbling over words or proper names, please don't feel bad. It can be a challenge even if you understand and can read some Chinese. When I'm reading Leggy version, it's written very old. He's using the Wade-Giles system, and I even sometimes stumble because I'm trying to remember how is that character pronounced. So no judgment there. As far as these two passages go, they do center on three characters, and I put three names, but the other character is Yan Hui or Yan Yuan, same guy, different names. Once again, not only is the confusion that there are different ways to anglicize it, there are also your proper name, your informal name, your temple name, etc., etc. And so a person could be referred to in up to four or five different ways, and it all be referring to the same person, just depending on who's doing the talking. So Yan Wen says, I don't dare die while you're alive. And then he goes and dies. This also factors into Confucius' lament in the earlier parts of Book 11. Yan Yue, obviously through no fault of his own, because we get from this passage that he wouldn't do it intentionally, but he betrayed him just in the result, not in his action. These other two, Ranchu and Zulu, I'm picking names to call them by, are kind of the standout remainder after Yan Yue is gone. But Ranchu is a little too fixated on the purse strings, on the bottom line, on, making sure I'm getting the money into the treasury, because, and I think we have to do some speculation here. My speculation is Ranchu and Yanwei were both very poor. Ranchu became much wealthier, whereas Yanwei remained poor his whole life, which tells you something about Ranchu's character. He has a bit of a materialistic side to him, a bit of a want to, okay, I got to get the proper clothes, I got to get if I'm going to get the job, I got to look the part, is something I kind of get from his character in reading the Analects. Whereas Yanhui never bought into that game, but it cost him the ability to ever get a job. Jason said, we don't know why Yanhui never got a job. We don't, but my speculation would be, given the options between, hey, you've got a couple of towels of silver here, you could go and get yourself outfitted and be prepared to be a minister. And he'd probably say, yeah, but I should really give it to the master because it would serve him better and he'll do with it something more important than what I can do. And so he was overly giving of himself. And then, of course, Zulu, who we already know to be a little impetuous, a little coarse, a little rough around the edges. But what is Confucius' answer when he's talking about these two individuals? He doesn't bring up their character. He talks about the character of someone who does the job. And anyone who does the job ought to do it in accordance with Tao and retire when they can't do so any longer. Hint, hint, wink, wink, get out of the way, Jizaran. And when he says, yeah, but will they follow orders? He says, not to kill a father or a lord. He's talking about not just their character and the lessons that he teaches about Xiao and Ren, but he's also talking about the character of anyone who deserves this job will not follow orders you give that violate those absolute paramount tenets of being a jinsa.
Thank you, Lon. Would anybody like to comment on either one of these passages? Just feel free to type exclamation point in the chat or raise your hand in Zoom. Well, first we'll go with Quan, and then I believe Nicholas is raising his hand physically. So we'll come to you in a moment, Nicholas.
Okay, so I want to start with the simple subject of the transliteration first. The old system of giants is probably more spontaneous for English speaker because it tries to imitate the natural phonetic value of English. Okay, for example, you would have stuff like TS, and in the pinyin system, the TS is the C. So an English speaker would never associate C to the sound, Or another example is the Tao, for example. The Tao in the jade wines is a T, which is the right pronunciation. So it's very natural for an English speaker when he sees Tao, he would pronounce Tao, which is exact. And even if he doesn't know that it's the fourth tone, but in the pinyin system is a D. So you have to know that D is equal to the T phonetic value of T in English. So I would say that the simple solution for that, if you did not make an effort to learn the equivalent phonetic values of the pinyin system, is simply to pronounce like in English, okay? For example, if you see Quin, which is Qin, or second tone Qin, which is the principality having given birth to the first empire, if you pronounce Queen and it's written Queen with the English value of pronunciation, everyone understand you are referring to that three letters Qin. Okay, it's just for internal use. Of course, if someone would go further in the study of Chinese, it's another problem. Of course, that person would have to learn the phonetic equivalent in English of the pinyin system. So it is a way for the Chinese Communist Party of China to bother the English speakers of the world. And
Yeah,
they
very,
found a good way to torture people.
yeah, we should not talk this one too long, but it's terrible when I translate. And unfortunately, a lot like 指路 also called you, that's Y-O-U, that's you. They have the 燃油, it called you, also spells Y-O-U. So there's a lot of same in English, but actually different in Chinese. And then all mess up. It's very difficult. So if you got confused, I'm sorry, I still haven't have a good way to do it. Anyway.
Exactly. So there's no way. Probably the jade wines.
I almost want to put like A, B, C, D and then make a table on that.
Yeah. Well, I would say that if you make an effort, the pinyin system can be learned in a week, okay? But you have to practice. But it's not really the main goal here. It's more to understand philosophy and history and epistemology. So that being said, the 121, okay, 124, it's about a reference to what happened to Duke Zhao of Lu, who ruled between 542 BCE and 510 BCE. The Ji family, which is a minor branch or cadet branch of the Dukes of Lu, managed to control the state during that time. And they managed to kick the Duke Chao out of the state when Confucius was a young man of around 30 years old. So let's not forget that Confucius was born in 551 BCE, so he was a young man of 30 around 521 BCE. And Luke Zhao will die abroad 10 years later in 510 BCE, okay? But he was kicked out of power around 521 BCE after the shenanigans of that Ji family, precisely. And I would say that at that time, everyone under the rank of those three great family, the Ji, the Meng, and the Chongsun, will have to choose. Either they would go with the legitimate branch of the Duke of Lu, or they would have to serve the three families and participate to their shenanigans and to their control of the state. And I would say that Confucius is a little bit perceived as a lunatic old man at the time, because the trend of the time was precisely to go with the ministerial branches of the family, because most of the legitimate branch in every principality of the Chinese world at that time began to lose their true power, and their power has been monopolized by the cadet branches of their family, exactly what happened in Lu. And Let's not forget that here we have to distinguish between philosophy and how to be a gentleman. Okay, but if you look at history, that proclivity of the major branch to lose power to a certain extent will bring directly to the creation of the empire in 221 BCE, meaning that the fact that minor branches of princely families would seize the power was in the right direction of history, but that can be debated, of course. I stopped here.
Thank you, Juan. I don't know if Jason or Ramon want to comment, but are you okay? Or do you have any comments?
I think
No. Okay, we'll go to Nicholas then. Oh, you're on mute, Nicholas. Let me ask.
I want to apologize for being late for the webinar. That was late. Yeah, I apologize.
We're studying Confucius. We're not standing on his policies. You're more than welcome.
Was that all you had to add, Nicholas?
Well, the Analects of Confucius define
That's okay if it is.
Define analect with the precise.
The word analects is an anachronistic term that translates to English as questions.
Yeah.
Like an inquiry.
No, it's a Greek word, okay, because analects is the English transcription. It's not a translation. It's the transliteration, meaning the Greek word is analekton. Okay, why they chose a Greek word? Because let's not forget that the English scholars of the 19th century and of the beginning of the 20th century, they were also scholars in Latin and in Greek. Okay, because of the classical education in the West at the time. So when they read the Chinese expression Lunyu, okay, which words for words mean selected sayings, okay? Lun meaning selected or compiled, and Yu means sayings of someone, of Confucius, of course. So because those people were scholar in Greek and Latin, the exact Greek word would translate Lunyu is analekton, okay? Selected sayings. So in English, analecton became analects. That's all.
Gotcha. Understood.
Thank you.
And
Thank you, Nicholas.
as long as we're talking about this just briefly, Confucius is a Latinized version of Confucius, which are the titles of Master Kong.
Yeah, exactly.
Are there any other comments that anybody else wishes to comment on 23 or 24? I'll just comment really quickly on the contrast between the two, where in 23 there seems to be an extreme amount of loyalty, where all the way to the death, specifically, where in 24, interestingly enough, there are lines that seem to be drawn as to how loyal someone ought to be. Specifically, in an act of parricide or regenocide, they would not follow him. And he's referring to Yao and Kuei, if I said that correctly. Yeah, I just found that to be an interesting contrast between 23 and 24, the loyalty and the bond that exists between Confucius and his students, and versus, then how there's limits to loyalty in serving in public office, and that they would not cross certain lines, therefore maintain their character under all circumstances.
I do want to say they're not quite as incommensurate as they may seem at first blush, in the way that, Yan Wei is willing to sacrifice himself, but there are limits to loyalty, as you say in 24. However, you don't get a saying from Confucius that Yan Wei would sacrifice his parents or that he would betray a lord.
Right.
He would not violate the directives of Shao or Ren. Those things are sacrosanct, paramount, inviolable to a good junsa, a good student of Confucius. And that's just consistent through. However, self-sacrifice, that was something that was not unheard of, especially if it was in service of something much greater than you. I won't go on the tangent of I could cite examples, but I won't do it. I will simply say that simply letting yourself be the sacrifice, if it is for a greater cause. And when he says Yan Wei or Yan Yuan fell behind, it's possible that was to sort of cover your six. I'm your rear guard. I will sacrifice myself if necessary so that you may get out of here. But I both did, the action of potentially sacrificing myself and made good on my duty to serve you by not having to in the end. And so there's a paradox there a little bit, but they're not as far apart as they may seem.
Thank you for that clarification. Quan.
I would say that what we read in the chapter 11 is very interesting, because I would say that it's a little bit the display of Chinese society or Chinese civilization, if you want, okay, between timelessness and time. Because the Chinese children, if they got a classical education, would be exposed to very noble principles like beauty, goodness, and truth, and so on. And that it is what is written in the Analects and the 4 books and the 5 classic, okay, the Si Shu Wu Jing. However, what is interesting in the Analects precisely, that at the same time than the exposition or the display of those heavenly principles, you also have very short script of people interacting in time, okay, and showing their defects, and Confucius going as far as to call some dumb, stupid, or not very sincere, and etc. So I would say that if there's a classic in terms of civilizational treasure that shows that kind of stuff, is probably in the Analects. A little bit, that I like to make the rapprochement between Confucius and Plato, because in the dialogues of Plato, you also have that kind of stuff. You have the display of high principles on heavenly intentions and so on, but at the same time, you have people interacting. And sometimes at a very low level, for example, in the Republic, you have Thrasymachus, who would say that justice is the advantage of the powerful. Okay, so very down to earth declaration from a plutocrat. So I want to, probably it's pervasive through the Analects, but I think that in chapter 11 is especially present, that a clash between timelessness, the enunciation of high principles, and time, the people in flesh who incarnate more or less well those high heavenly principles.
Thank you very much for that, Quan. And I believe Nicholas has his hand up as well. And then we'll go to the next portion of the Analects. You're on mute.
I want to add what Eamon was saying about sacrifices. I could
One,
correlate
yes.
that with the book of Leviticus.
Okay. Is that your comment?
Yeah, no, simply
Okay.
a comment.
Thank you. All right. Thank you, Nicholas. Very much appreciate that. So, Jason, shall we go on
So let's
to?
move on the 25, and then we were ready for the last chapter. So who would like
Shall
to
I?
read chapter? Yeah. So you
Shall
want
I
to read?
try and make another? Yeah, I'll give it another.
Yeah, probably you want to save your
So-
voice to read 26.
yeah. 20. Yeah, exactly.
Just a warm up.
Zulu. Yes, yeah. I needed 3 to get my chords in order. Zulu got Zhugo Gao appointed governor of Fei. The master said, "You are injuring a man's son." Zulu said, There are common people and officers. There are altars of the spirits of the land and grain. Why must one read books before he can be considered to have learned? The master said, "It is on this account that I hate your glib-tongued people." Wow, that was a
So
little bit
what's
rough.
the last sentence? Can you repeat? What's the last sentence?
Sure. It is on this account that I hate your glib-tongued people.
Okay.
Yeah,
Yeah.
I know. So
Yeah, it's
there's a lot of liberties that must have been taken.
Yes, because Amang and I also discussed on this part. And then not only the translation has a problem, and the traditionally and interpretation have a different kind of interpretation. This one, of course, I keep 2 versions of this. So first, Zilu, I assume everybody know who is Zilu. He's much senior person. He's rushed and he do everything immediately. So this one, the background must be Zilu work for the Ji family. Okay, that must be the case. Okay, and since he is much senior, so he appointed Zigao. Okay, so Zilu appointed Zigao to be the magistrate of the city of B. If you remember, book I think book 6, right? There's a guy called Min Ziqian. Okay, in book 11, Confucius considered him as a virtuous person. Okay, that Min Ziqian also been appointed to the magistrate of B, and Min Ziqian refused to take this job, and he said, "If you appoint me again, I'm going to escape to the neighboring country." So he doesn't want to work for the Ji family, and he doesn't want to take this job. Consider Min Ziqian is a much senior, much learned person. So right now, Zilu appoint a young guy, Zigao. If you don't know who is Zigao, also called Gao Cai. If you go back to which chapter? They have a chapter talk about Gao Cai is dumb, right? In the previous section, they have the comment on different students. So Gao Cai, which is Zigao, okay, this person Zigao, okay, and also his name is Cai. Cai is dumb. So right now, Zilu appoint a young disciple and who being considered as dumb, not smart, to the position of magistrate of state of B. I don't know how important of the state of the city of B, but at least that's a certain kind of job. So the master comment is, you are damaging this young man. Okay, he used the word somebody's son, so that means this young guy. You are damaging him. That's Confucius' comment on Zilu. Okay, and then Zilu's answer is very interesting. He said, there are people to govern and there are national altars to be administered. Okay, So basics, Zilu said, I'm asking him to do this job. He has a chance to practice the ceremony, the altar ceremony, the national altar. He can host the ceremony. That the people he can govern, right? That's the way of learning. So he said, why must one first read text and only then be considered learned? Remember, Confucius want people to, on the first chapter, he talked about he want people learned and then get a job, not get a job and learn. Okay, so Zilu is kind of against this idea. He say, well, he's young and not so smart. Basically, you can say he's not learned enough. And I appoint him as the mayor or the magistrate of the city of B. And Zilu say, well, they have the people and they have the job he can learn, not necessary, to read the book and you consider learn. Then Confucius' answer is very interesting. That's why I keep two versions on that. My translation will call, do you need to be so eloquent? Okay. Another word to call it is, do you need to be so argumentative, right? Because so Amman provides the answer, aren't you ashamed of being so eloquent? So even in traditional Chinese kind of interpret, kind of see Confucius is criticizing Zilu. Okay, why you argue? Talk back to me. But I take a different view. I see Confucius kind of teasing Zilu. Okay, he's not really criticized. He said, "I know it. But you don't have to talk in this way. That's my opinion. But I just have to say, Zilu's answer is, and actually, I agree with Zilu. Okay, you can do something and learn at the same time. And then Confucius' answer also interesting that you are so eloquent, and we know Zilu never been an eloquent person. Okay, Confucius say so. I think Confucius is teasing him, not really criticizing him. But not everybody read in the same way. So I will give to Amang. And what do you think of this?
Well, thank you, Jason. And again, I'm always flattered when you opt to retain one of my alternative suggestions. Even I think it's good for the sake of seeing the comparison, though different ways that this last line can be interpreted. I don't want to delve into the weeds on translation right now. I do want to talk just a little bit about what is it that is being addressed here. When he says, you're damaging this young man, and you can almost see, it's like, you're screwing it up. And the guy's like, how am I screwing it up? Here's my defense. These are people, I'm there to govern affairs. I'm not, I'm not the Lord. I'm not the person who makes all the final judgments. I'm just, an administrator. What do you want from me? And his retort to it isn't to justify his pushback. It's to tease him. Jason says gently, but I think it's a real barb to the character of who and what Zulu is when he's saying, aren't you ashamed to be so eloquent? Don't you feel that? Why do you feel the need to always be so eloquent? Why do you always do the thing that you're never been accused of doing, except right now you're trying to use your words to dig yourself out of a hole? I think that's a really I think it's interesting because he accuses Zulu of being too coarse. And one could almost say that this is the very highbrow, very eloquent way of Confucius being coarse with Zulu for the sake of a really important lesson, which is, hey, there's always somebody who's going to Monday morning, quarterback you. You're going to have to get used to getting some judgment for your performance. You don't want to leap to the defense every time. You're going to have, maybe you should just sit and mull over the words a bit before, like all the other advice I've given you up to this point, Mr. Zulu, that you need to be more thoughtful. You need to be more prudent. You need to be more patient. Rallying to defense immediately when you're not even sure what you're defending for, terrible idea.
Thank you, Aman. Quan.
This episode is, which might seems a little bit laughable, is related also to a very important episode in the history of China and in history of the Principality of Lu. Okay, because P is the fortress of the Ji family. Okay, meaning that it's a city, but it's also their fortress from where they can go against the Duke of Lu if needed. So the man at the head of that fortress or that citadel city, if you want, is a man having their confidence. So if Zilu give to Zikao the command of that fortress, it means that Zikao could be in the future be considered as a personal retainer and having personal loyalty to the G branch rather than to the main branch of the ducal house. And so here we have the political play that is happening in that time. And that's why the master said, you are stealing another man's son, okay? Meaning you are leading him into the primrose path, okay? To an easy path that would lead to his destruction, because you push him to serve the powerful, but that is not necessarily the righteous way. And what is interesting is that in the 3 years between 500 BCE and 497 BCE, Confucius would try to restore the power of the main branch of the ducal house, and he will fail in his attempt to restore the power of the Dukes of Lu, and because of that, he would have to live in exile in 497 BCE, and that small conversation would appears to be laughable at first glance, is precisely within that sophisticated political situation at the time, and who will bring Confucius exile from 497 BCE to 484 BCE in his attempts to find the perfect ruler. And of course, he fell in his search. I stop here.
Thank you for that, Quan.
So Quan, let me ask you one question, since you know more on this historical background. So in your opinion, Zilu really damaged Zigao, because the city of B is such an important fortress, and you should not have this kind of inexperienced young man to do this.
Absolutely, because if you remember, Jason, Confucius tried to convince Duke Ting of Lu to raise the fortress of the three family.
Okay.
Of the Ji, of the Hmong, and of the Chonsun, right? So he tried to infiltrate his own man within as the commander-in-chief of the fortress of the Ji, of the Hmong, and of the Chongsun. But as you rightly understood, to send as the commander of the fortress of the Ji someone as inexperienced as Zikao was a factor that would lead to the failure of the Confucius faction to help the Duke of Lu to restore his power and bring Confucius exile in 497 BCE. So it was
Confucius is really not happy when he criticized Zilu.
Oh, absolutely. Because
Okay.
it was a fatal mistake that would bring to his demise and exile in 497 BCE.
And why he called Zilu Nin? Okay, that's the strange word to comment on Zilu because Zilu doesn't fit for this kind of qualification, right? I just try
Well,
to challenge you. So
yes, well, Zulu is a complex character. He was a brilliant man. Okay, he was capable to be a participant in government and to participate to the sophisticated political games. So I would say that I think that it would be wrong to see Zulu as a simple-minded man. Okay, he's a loyal person. He's a spontaneous person, but being spontaneous doesn't mean that he was dumb in terms of political maneuvers. He understood those things. But in the case of Zhou, he made the political mistake by selecting him as the commander of the Confucius faction for the fortress of the Ji family, because the Ji family set a trap for Zulu to send Zhou over there, because the members of the Ji family knew perfectly that it would be easy to overthrow Zhou because he was not of the kind to be capable to resist to the own aristocrat of the Ji family.
Aman, please.
Oh, I did unmute. Sorry. I wanted to point out some of the propheticness here because we're talking about Zulu, and he is, to my mind, the most interesting of Confucius students in terms of his fate. According to Sima Chen, who was China's first historian, he was killed when he refused to enter the city to confront the Kwei and was killed by their men. And in his death, his minister's hat, his sign of office, the string that held it on his head, was cut. And supposedly the story goes that as he lay dying on the floor, he crawled over to his hat to take it and put it back on, and was quoted as saying, "A gentleman always wears his cap," something to that effect. So Kwan's right. He is a complex and interesting character, but as Confucius hinted earlier in the Analects, he's not fated for a natural death. His impulsivity and decision-making sometimes gets the best of him and doesn't make him quite as thoughtful as he could be.
I just want to add 30 seconds, okay?
Please go ahead.
I would make a rapprochement between Zulu, which is 9 years younger than Confucius, and Ran Qiu, who was 30 to 35 years younger than Confucius. But Ran Qiu, I would say, is the young Zulu, but more thoughtful, okay? And Ran Qiu also has been accepted by the Ji family because Ran Qiu precisely won a battle for the Ji family in 484 BCE because the Qi principality attacked the Lu principality in 484 BCE, and Ran Qiu was victorious at that battle. And because Ran Qiu was victorious at that battle, he asked to the Ji family to accept the return of Confucius from exile. So it's quite ironical that the younger version of Zulu, who was less rash and more thoughtful, would bring back the same Confucius who has been exiled because of the rashness of his older version, Zulu. So it's a little bit ironical.
Are there any other hands or comments about this? I'll just say really quickly, I did find it is on this account that I hate your glib-tongued people. An interesting comment, at the very least. only so far as the idea we've talked about rhetoric quite a bit in this chapter earlier. And the importance to be able to speak eloquently, but there still needs to be meaning behind the words that you're speaking. So I think we've all had situations where we've been where there's been a fast talker or somebody that's kind of very very, I don't know, I don't want to even say convincing, but saying a lot but not saying anything at the same time. So anyway, that would be my observation, is there's a little sophistry there.
I believe Nicholas had his hand up, actually.
Oh, he did. Forgive me, Nicholas. Nicholas, please. Then we'll go to Jason. You're up, muted, Nicholas.
I digress. I
Okay,
digress.
thank you. Very good.
Okay, so well, I think basically, thank you, Kwang, for the this background. So I think I probably should change the translation, because traditionally, people translate this name as eloquent, but I think we should translate as the flattery, right? Because Confucius probably not complain about Zilu's argument, probably complain about Zilu's flattery to the Ji family, because he do what Ji family want him to do. I think that probably should be the right way to read it. I don't know how do you think, Fang?
I like very much Professor Eno said the glib talkers, okay, and it's a little bit in relation with what Joe said, because Zulu is loyal to Confucius, okay, he wants to bring down the three families to restore the power of the Duke of Lu. But here he is a glib talker, meaning that his talk doesn't match his decision and his capacity to act in reality, okay? Because if you Zulu say there are people there, there are entours of the state there, why must one first read text and only be considered learned? Meaning that okay, I understand all those stuff, all those timelessness, beauty, goodness, and truth, and blah blah blah. But why should not I act here? Okay, and unhappily, his decision was bad. Okay, so talking like he was talking was a kind of a verbal justification for his decision, which was a bad decision, because naming Zhu Gao to that vital post would bring the failure of Confucius' plan to bring down the three family by destroying their citadels. And that's why I think that Professor Eno, when he translated that, this is why I detest glib talkers, meaning people talking for nothing, and that their talk doesn't match their deeds or their achievement.
Okay, thank you. I think that makes sense. Thank you. So I think
shall we?
For the last part. So
yes, especially if we're going to have some time for discussion. There's no chance I can.
Do you want me to tackle this one, Joe?
I would very much appreciate it. It would be an act of mercy for everyone else.
Forewarn, I can repeat in Wade Giles I have a harder time with, so my pronunciation may suffer along the way. But I am happy to give the leggy version.
I will say this. Even if you say it incorrectly, it still sounds better coming out of your mouth.
Yeah, except then I look at it in PN and I realize, oh, I said the wrong name. So I digress. Verse 26. Zulu, Zhangsu, Ranyu, and Kwangsu Ha were sitting by the master. He said to them, "Though I am a day or so older than you, do not think of that. From day to day, you are saying, we are not known. If some ruler were to know you, what would you like to do?" Zulu hastily and lightly replied, "Suppose the cast of a state of 10,000 chariots, let it be straightened between other large states. Let it be suffering from invading armies, and to this let there be added a famine in corn and all vegetables. If I were entrusted with the government of it, in 3 years' time, I could make the people to be bold and to recognize the rules of righteous conduct." The master smiled at him. Turning to Yan Yue, he said, "Qiu, what are your wishes?" Qiu replied, "Suppose a state of 60 or 70 li square, or one of 50 or 60, and let me have the government of it. In 3 years' time, I could make plenty to abound among the people. As to teaching them the principles of propriety and music, I must wait for the rise of a superior man to do that. What are your wishes, Chihu?" said the master to Hong Sihua. Chihu replied, "I do not say that my ability extends to these things, but I should wish to learn them. At the service of the ancestral temple and at the audience of the princes with the sovereign, I should like, dressed in the dark square-made robe and the black linen cap, to act as a small assistant." Last of all, the master asked Song Si, "Tian, what are your wishes?" Tian, pausing as he was playing his lute, while it was yet twanging, laid the instrument aside, and "My wishes," he said, "are different from the cherished purposes of these 3 gentlemen." "What harm is there in that?" said the master. "Do you also, as well as they, speak out your wishes?" Tian then said, "In this, the last month of spring, with the dress of the season all complete, along with 5 or 6 young men who have assumed the cap, and 6 or 7 boys, I would wash in the eye, enjoy the breeze among the rain altars, and return home singing." The master heaved a sigh and said, "I give my approval to Tian." The 3 others having gone out, Song Si remained behind and said, "What do you think of the words of these 3 friends?" The master replied, "They simply told each one his wishes." Si pursued, "Master, why did you smile at you?" He answered, "The management of a state demands the rules of propriety." His words were not humble, therefore I smiled at him. Si again said, "But was it not a state which Chu proposed for himself?" The reply was, "Yes. Did you ever see a territory of 60 or 70 li, or one of 50 or 60? Which was not a state." Once more, Si inquired, "And was it not a state that she proposed for himself?" The master again replied, "Yes. Who but princes have to do with ancestral temples and with audiences but the sovereign? If she were to be a small assistant in these services, who could be a great one?"
Okay, thank you,
Thank you
Amma.
so much for that. Thank you very much. Well done.
Sorry to, I think that we have another one on book 20. It's also very long. Book Yang, I forget which one. 18. Okay, also very long. So usually it's not very long. So that's only a few. So that'll be fine. So I think that this one actually is a very famous one, considered important during the Song dynasty in the Neo-Confucius movement. Okay. So we can see this one as a three-part. The first part is Confucius and the four disciples sitting together and the discussion. You can see the scene, they are very relaxed, kind of chatting to each other, just like last week. I talking about the teacher-student relationship, probably similar to today's in America, the professor and the PhD candidate, this kind of relationship. So the first part is they are talking about what you can do if somebody know you. And the second part is Confucius share with Zheng Xi, which is Dian, okay, his idea, and which is matched with Confucius. And the third part is Confucius comment on each of the three students' the aspiration, let's put it this way. So let's read on the first part. I separate as the 7 pieces, so it'll be easy to handle. So first, 子路、曾皙、冉有, and 公西华. I think you probably are familiar with everyone except Zheng Xi. Okay, Zheng Xi, you I think in book 6, right? A daughter of Zheng Shen, okay, who is much younger, like 40-something younger than Confucius. His father, okay, his father also a disciple of Confucius, and of course his father is, I think, same age as Zilu, considered a very senior disciple. So Zilu, Zheng Xi, okay, and Zheng Xi, Confucius will call him Dian, okay. Remember, Zheng Xi is Dian, okay. Ran You is Qiu, okay, and the Gong Xi Hua is Chi, okay. So these 4 were sitting in attendance. The master said, though I am a day or also older than you, okay, actually he's 9 years to Zilu, older than Zilu and Zheng Xi, and 30 or 40 years older than Ran You, the Gong Xi, but he just try to be humble, okay, say, I'm a day or so older than you. Do not think of that. Don't hesitate, because I'm senior, but don't think about I'm more senior, that we are equal, okay? From day to day, you are saying, we are not known. If some ruler were to know you, what will you do? Okay, so that's a very common, just like, common chat with your friend. If you've been hired by Google, what will you do? Okay, something like this, okay? So Zilu hastily replied. Remember, Zilu always rush, okay, and want to be the first to answer, okay? So Zilu hastily replied, let me be in charge of a state of southern chariot, which is threatened by the armies of its neighboring large nations and suffering from famines. Basically, Zilu talking about in a very difficult situation, if he can be in charge. So within 3 years, the people will become courageous and virtuous. Okay, so basically he said, I can take care of this kind of difficult situation. In 3 years, I will turn around, make the country, okay, make the country strong, powerful, and the people will become courageous and also virtuous. That's Zilu's ambition. So Confucius smiles at him. Okay, so people knows Confucius not agree with Zilu. Okay, that's why he smiled. Okay, so Confucius said, Qiu, which is Ran You, is much younger. What about you? Okay, so kind of become a test, right? Ran You know Confucius smile doesn't mean Confucius didn't approve what Zilu said. So Ran You tried to be more humble. So he replied, let me be in charge of a state of 60 or 70 square miles or 50 or 60 square miles. He tried to downsize. Don't want to talk about too big state, okay? Within 3 years, the people will have a sufficient means, okay? Confucius expert in finance. So he talking about the small state, the small area will be, the people will have enough means, okay, within 3 years, okay. Regarding rituals and the music, they may need to wait for a 君子 to come. So he said, oh, I'm not good enough to do, to teach people about rituals and the music. So Confucius asked another student, even younger student, Gong Xihua, who Confucius called him Chi, right? Chi, what about you? So Gong Xihua replied, I do. So Gong Xihua tried to be even more humble. Okay, so Gong Xihua said, I do not say that I have the ability, but I would like to learn to be a minor officer, wearing a ceremonial cap and the robe in the ancestral temples or diplomatic meetings. So I think he probably go too humble. Okay. So Confucius didn't say anything. Okay. So right now to the second part. Confucius asked Zheng Xi, who is Zheng Shen's father, a much senior student. So just to remind everyone, this person, I think he only appeared in Analects only once in this one. Okay. So Dian, who is Zheng Xi, okay, Dian, what about you? That's Confucius' answer. So the scene is very interesting. Say the rhyme of his lute was intermittent while the string was still ringing. He set down his lute and stood up. Okay. So apparently when they are talking, Zheng Dian or Zheng Xi, okay, is playing the music, playing the lute. So he put down and stand up. He replied, mine is quite different from the others three. The master said, what harm can there be? Each of us simply speaks of his aspirations. So he replied, Zheng Xi or Zheng Dian replied, okay, it's very strange answer. Okay, I believe everybody may see it's a strange answer. Okay, he replied, in a late spring, wearing a spring garment, I will go out with 5 or 6 young men and 6 or 7 young boys. We will bathe in the river Yi. Okay, river Yi is the place have a hot spring in the state of Lu, and enjoy the wind on the stage of Wu Yu. Okay, Wu is a stage for worship. Okay, so so that's kind of like a playground. People can relax over there. So then we will return home while singing. Okay, that's his aspiration. Okay, it's totally different than the other three. So Confucius sighed and said, I'm with Dian. So Confucius doesn't agree with the other three disciples. He only agreed with Dian, who is Zheng Xi. Okay, so the other 3 disciples went out, but Zheng Xi lingered behind. So right now become the private conversation between Confucius and Zheng Xi. And Zheng Xi start to ask, why you smile, right? Zheng Xi asked, what about the words of the other 3? The master said, each simply speaks of his aspiration. Okay, so Confucius kind of hesitated to answer his question. So Zheng Xi said, why did the master smile at you? You is Zilu, why you smile? Confucius said, a state will be governed in accordance with rituals. Zilu's words are not humble at all. That's why I smile at him. Okay, Confucius' point is governing a state has to use the rituals, okay, not by the power. Zilu is talking about totally different wrong way, okay, and he's not humble. That's why I smile at him. Then Zheng Xi said, the Qiu, who is Ran Qiu, okay, aspiration was not to manage a state, was it? So Ran Qiu also talk about manage a state, right? And then Confucius say, how can one see a territory of 60 or 70 square miles or 7 or even 50 or 60, not a state? So Confucius' answer is Chu still talking about a state, managing a small state. Okay, so Zheng Xi asks again, the Chi, who is Gong Xihua, aspiration was not to manage a state, was it? Then Confucius said, are not ancestral temple and the diplomatic meeting about the fail of a feudal state? If Chi were a minor officer, who would be a major one? So that's his answer. So the conversation ends here. It's a lot of puzzle, but basically it depicts the situation of the Confucius and his disciples discussion about your aspiration. So I think that's about it. And then my point, that's what I read. Okay, and then I was happy to see how do you read this one. I think when Confucius asks, talking about what you will do, what's your aspiration, he is asking about the end, what's your goal. And unfortunately, Zilu, Ranyu, and the Gong Xihua, these three, their answer is talking about politics, talking about managing a state. Managing a state in public, in Confucius' point of view, probably only a means, not the end. Only Zheng Dian or Zheng Xi, he answered the right question. He talked about the end. The end is taking care of the older, taking care of the older people and the younger people. Everybody settled in the happy, peaceful life. That's the end. That should be your aspiration. Not talking about strong country, a powerful nation, make people rich. Okay, that's just the means. Okay, the end is taking care of everybody. I think that's his message, and that's what I read. And then I will be happy to see how do you see this one, or you find out it's difficult to understand or it doesn't make sense. I also that's fine. We are here to discuss this chapter. So I hand over to Aman and then see how Aman.
Thank you. As we're getting towards the end, we'll probably not make it into book 12, and that's fine. We didn't anticipate it, but we're wrapping up book 11. And what a beautiful way to wrap it up. I mean, this is a vignette. What you're seeing is the cowboys at the end of the trail around the campfire scene brought to life in the Analects in Confucius, with Confucius and 4 of his students sitting around playing the lute, and Confucius saying, don't talk to me like I'm the teacher right now. Let's talk fancy. Let's dream big. Let me hear your dreams. I want to know what they are. And Zulu doesn't hesitate. He tells him immediately, but his reaction starts to, because his reaction wasn't, I hesitate to even say it's negative. He smiles, but everybody interprets that as, oh, he got it wrong. This is still a quiz. We're still on the clock. All right, everyone get your answers right. And everyone starts to try and softball in answers with really big ambitions. Because Ranyu is talking about, microeconomicing a small territory into plenty, and as Confucius is listening to him, he's just kind of nodding his head. And then Gong Xihua wants to even softball it more, but accidentally winds up saying, I want to be the lord of a state. I want to be the guy in charge. I want that job that I will never actually have, even though he's trying to do it, as gently as possible. Zheng Xi actually gives an answer, and he's had more time to think than Zulu, but he is still giving an answer. I agree with Jason. I do think that the idea that there's means and then there's an end is one layer to why this is the approvable answer. But I think an additional layer is what he talks about is his genuine self, what he really actually wants. I don't think Confucius himself would say, yes, a Bohemian Rhapsody is absolutely what I am after as well. He wasn't known for playing instruments. He wasn't known for, going and singing his way home after the hot springs at the end of a night. This kind of like very bohemian, very sort of almost, I'm picturing a commune in the 70s in my mind, just this idyllic, bucolic setting. That's not what Confucius has ever expressed that he wanted. But what Zhongxi has said is his true desire. And it has almost nothing to necessarily do with the state, other than, as Jason says, it's the ends of what a well-run state makes possible. It makes possible this person to live this life. There's a famous quote, and I'm going to butcher it because I'm doing it off the cuff, but I believe it was John Adams who said, I study politics so my children can study the sciences and medicine so my grandchildren can study poetry and art. I'm butchering that paraphrase, but that was the crux of it. And so in that, I agree. I do find it funny, though, because when he goes to answer Zhongxi's questions about each of them, the remonstration is incredibly telling, and I had to take notes to pick it up. Like I pointed out, Lunyu's idea of microeconomics being manageable, and Confucius saying it's the same as macroeconomics, and you'd actually be doing that in what you're expressing. You're just trying to keep it, make it feel palatable, but just because it's small will not make it less complex. It will not be less difficult. Whether you do it on a micro or macro level, you're still going to be dealing with the same sort of fundamental complexities. Like I said, Geng Shihua, he was actually talking about the job of the lord of a land. And so him being the youngest, it's kind of funny because he thinks he's being the most humble and he's actually espousing the highest ambitions. Zulu, though, I found his interesting because his reaction was, I need to give the people courage. And he says, no, you need to give them ritual, because I want to say the whole point of ritual, which is not the whole point of ritual, but one of the very large points of ritual is to humble the individual, because you have to supplement your own wants into a formalized action. You have to do what the ritual calls for. So it demands a degree of humility from the participant in the ritual. And this is why Zulu's first response was so off the mark. I think this is a beautiful scene. I think it's probably the most genuine glimpse we get into what a day in the life of Confucius and his students might actually look like. And we learn, among everything else, that even downtime isn't really downtime. There are lessons to be learned in your daydreams. There are lessons to be learned in pursuing your pleasures. There's lessons to be learned even when all you're doing is daydreaming of a finale.
Thank you for that, Aman. That was fantastic. Anybody else like to comment on passage 26, or actually just on chapter 11 in general at this particular moment in time? I mean, since we're coming up here on the final 15 minutes, if you'd like any feedback or anything, please feel free. And I see Nicholas, you have your hand. Yeah, you need to unmute.
Joseph, may you send the PDF file of the Analects of Confucius? The
It's in the
file,
chat right now.
chat.
So Jason's translation
So I just
isn't
chapter. I'm going to, when we finish, I'm going to share the PDF on the book. Okay, so right now this one is free to take a look on the PDF file, and I just share with everyone. Okay, that's a chapter, book 11. So just feel free to have it, and probably have some mistake because Mang and I work on this one on the part-time basis, and then if you find some misspelling, something wrong, so please just let me know. Say, oh, you misspelled. Okay, this one is not right. Okay. So
May you email it? May you email it to I? May you
we
email it
may
to
not
me?
be able to email. Are you able to read from the chat? You can
Well,
download and from the chat.
From the chat,
you
yeah.
can
Yeah,
if you
it
can
shows
download
up.
from the
Mhm.
I promise I promise I failed to send you the link, and I did promise to send it to you via Meetup, Nicholas. So I will follow up with that this evening. So but it will only be an HTML version. It will not be the PDF. It'll be the one on the Meetup page that I'll be sending you. So I will follow up as soon as this is over. So and then you can download Jason's right now if you wish. It's in the chat. I know it might be difficult on your phone. Quan.
Yes, first I want to say that Jason's distinction between the means and the end is really very interesting to give the core essential of this last vignette of chapter 11. And precisely when I said that in the Confucius, there is always that dance between timelessness and time, or between the end and the means, precisely. Um, what I want to say too is that, um, of course, I agree with everything that has been said. That the three ambitious guys stated their ambitions maybe with not enough li or respect or deference according to the criteria of the time. And I would say that the true rituals is probably one of the most powerful instrument to teach humility, or even the idea of God, because one rabbi one day said something that I find very outstanding. He said that the idea of God, even if it's only an idea, is very useful because you will not take yourself to be God if there is a God, even by idea. So I suppose that the rituals is the Chinese equivalent for you not to think that you are God. That's I cannot go against that kind of teaching, of course. But uh, going back to the excellent quotation of John Adams by Amon, that politics and economy is the foundation for medicine, architecture, and after that, the foundation for the arts and literature, etc. I think that the hierarchy is outstanding. It means that we need people having political and economical ambitions, like the three clumsy guys that have been a little bit chided by Confucius for their lack of humility and rituals. But at the same time, those ambitious people, in my mind, if they are sincere and if they are truly prepare. I think that is here the point. If they are sincere and they have truly rituals and they are prepared to will the power in the economical and political fields, those people with a sincere heart in their political and economical ambitions, for me, are very important. And it reminds me of a Ming Dynasty philosopher called Li Chu. Li Chu was born in 1527 and he died in 1602. And he said precisely that the core of his idea is precisely the dance between timelessness and time. He said it is very beautiful, of course, to put into the mind of the young people the sublime and heavenly ideas of beauty, goodness, and truth. But in real life, we need people capable to act, and to act with competence, and to act with a minimum of honesty. Okay. And after all, if the guy has ambition and he want to escape his poverty, and he want to enter the government because it's a way for him to escape his poverty, I don't care if his ambition is to escape his poverty or to save the state. What is important that he would be capable to do his job in the right manner and at the right level of competence. And I would say that Li Chu opinions is quite interesting to counterbalance a little bit that kind of timelessness, not fantasy, because I'm participating a little bit to that fantasy too, to that kind of timelessness atmosphere that is conveyed by Confucianism. So a little touch of pragmatism and of realism, like Li Chu brought in the 17th century, is not bad. And I finished with a quote by Deng Xiaoping that I will butcher because I don't remember exactly his quote, but it's called "The Criterion of the Bridge in the Village." And it's about corruption. Okay, Deng Xiaoping, who is the major Chinese statesman up after Mao Zedong, the one who brought who opened China to capitalism and who brought later the economic development and blah blah blah. What is called the criterion of the bridge over the river of the village is that if, and it's about corruption, okay? He said that if I discover that I allocated 100 unit of money for the construction of that bridge, and that I discovered that about 20% has been embezzled, and that the bridge is not destroyed but strong, and it lasted for many years, so for 20, 40 years, for me, that's okay. But in case the bridge is destroyed by the first storm, I would make a thorough investigation, and everyone that has been involved in the use of bad quality material would be sacked and would be punished. Okay, and that is called the bridge, the criterion of the river, of the bridge over the river in the village, meaning that it's the same position that the Li Chu position, the philosopher of the Ming Dynasty, meaning that we have to open a certain door to human weakness, but not to the extent that stuff are not done. And I stop here.
Thank you, Quan. So Yulia.
Hey, I have a question. So we've been talking about Ren in an ethical context a lot of the time. So to be humane or humanity in terms of ethics. But I'm wondering if it can be used in this context as well when we're talking about going to the river or singing or just enjoying being a human and enjoying kind of like human activities, if a Ren could be understood in that context as well. Thanks.
I think you absolutely nailed it, and I'm ashamed of myself for having missed it. But you're absolutely right. Confucius has said before that music is the sort of pleasure that being human makes us capable of appreciating. And so Zhong Xi's idealism and the fact that music plays so prominently in it is probably a not so subtle indication that this is the lubricant of Ren, of what makes that human connection possible. So thank you.
So thank you, Yulia. Okay, so let me share my reading on this one. Okay, so I try to summarize this one. So first, Zilu's solution, let's put this one. Zilu's solution is military or political solution. for the problem. So Ranqiu, the second one, his solution is economic solution. So try to make people rich. And the third one, Gong Xihua, his solution is moral solution, right? Talk about rituals, okay, this kind of ceremony, the moral solution. So only solution Confucius agreed is the Zhengxi solution, which just like Yulia talked about, humanity, music, happiness, eudaimonia. Okay, so that's the goal we are going to reach. Okay, not political military solution, not economic solution, not just the moral ritualistic solution. The real solution, our real goal is eudaimonia, or you call it the happiness, okay, for everybody. I think that's the, if we want to put it, it's the essence for this chapter. Yeah, I'll end here. Thank you.
That's a very good summary. Thank you, Jason. I think that actually lays out a lot of things actually for us. Thank you, Ahmad, for your evening. Very much appreciated your time. No, I think that you know, that actually really captured, I think, this well, maybe even the whole chapter in a way, where, you know, each of Confucius his students have different perspective on the world, and they also have their strengths, and they also have the way they feel like the best way to run a society. But ultimately, I very much appreciated the idea of humanity, or eudaimonia, as a way of actually flourishing, as Confucius's perspective. I've been reading quite a bit how that resonates across different cultures, but it seems to be very, you know, very, you know, very, you know, at the forefront of what Confucius is speaking about. When he's essentially, you know, talking about being free from more material and political aspirations. So I agree. I appreciate that. Does anybody else have any comments that they wish to share about Book 11? Anything in Book 11 at this point? I thought that this was, I think we really got into the personalities of each student into this, in this chapter. And I think Confucius's criticisms were actually very telling and very informative, especially with Lunyu. In particular, I've noticed, you know, maybe that stuck out to me when he was going to help a wealthy man become more wealthy, I believe, at one point. And so, and Confucius is basically, you know, stating as to why he didn't think that that was necessarily a good use of his talents. I think that there was also a deep appreciation for humility, even more so than, say, somebody that was actually moral. That in the sense that that's what I've taken from Zheng. How am I saying the last name? Zheng. I will learn these names before book 20. We'll get this.
Yeah.
So
maybe zhong C would be the most easy for you, because the other one is zheng Tian, and Tian is the third tone pronunciation, which is more complicated than zheng C.
Zheng C. Okay.
Yeah.
Zheng C.
Yeah. Okay. Anyway, so next. Oh, sorry. So I probably need to go, and then next week, start from next week. I think we are doing the schedule wise, we're probably doing well. You know, we either do 2 sections for a book or 3 sections for a book. So 12 is all short. So book 12 is all short and 24 chapter. So we probably will do 12 next week, and the week after we can do another 12. We finished book 12. Okay, so next week we'll do book 12.
And 13 is short as well. So
Yeah, they all. So I think we do 2